The Survivors is brought to you by our friends at Calmary. This podcast mentions suicide, mental illness, grief, and loss, and may be triggering for some listeners. So please take care of your well-being by pausing or skipping any sections that feel uncomfortable to you. And if you or someone you know is struggling, please call 988 for support.
So, you know what bugs me?
What bugs you?
Stigmas. Stigmas bug me, especially stigmas like suicide is a bad thing, which we know it's not a good thing, but it's not an immoral thing. It's not an illegal thing. It's a byproduct of an illness, right? But there's this whole stigma that we just cannot break away from. And it does, when I think about it, it drives me kind of crazy because, like, how do you change public perception on something when it's shrouded in stigma? And I love the fact that one of the things that you and I are going to be working so hard to do is to just break that whole stigma apart, because I can't stand it anymore.
Yeah, and the worst part about having it as a stigma is, like, nobody wants to talk about it. They just shy away from it.
Mm-hmm.
The minute you say you're a suicide attempt survivor, people are like, yeah.
Oh, everyone gets
what?
funky. Yeah.
And people back away. And, like, it bothers me that we can't talk about it openly. And like you said, that's why we're here. We want to talk about it openly. And yes, suicide is hard. It's hard for the loss survivors. It's very hard for those of us that are attempt survivors, right? We got to a really dark place in our life. And it took that for me to even open up about suicide. If, 5 years ago, this podcast would have never been in my wheelhouse because I hadn't experienced it. Now that I've been there and I'm living on the other side of that, I want to be able to talk about it so that people don't get to the point where I got to, where I am telling you, I was less than 2 minutes away from figuring out a way to take my life.
Yeah, I know.
And that's because I didn't know how to express what was going on in my head. And then once I started doing that, once I started opening up onto social media and talking with more and more friends, it got easier, but people still shied away from the topic. Like, it's so hard to even just say the word suicide.
Yeah.
And we need to change the perception of that word and what goes on in somebody's head when they're at that point.
Yeah, exactly. And it's terrifying. So many aspects of this, all aspects of suicide are terrifying. Being the person who's feeling like they need to end their life, being maybe a person who knows someone who is feeling suicidal and you want to help, like, either side of it is terrifying. But, being able to break this stigma comes down to, in large part, like, the language we use. Like, people can't get the help they need if they're too afraid of the stigma being attached to them, so they don't want to talk about it. So we have to go back to, like, where it all starts if we're going to affect change in that way. Like, I talk about this all the time, and I know you and I have talked about this before, but I feel like the root of all of it, it's the word choice we use. Like, it's how we've been taught from the time I can remember. I'm sure from the time you can remember, because you're so much older than I am.
Whatever.
I think that the way we're all taught is, someone committed suicide. Like, you look no further than that. Like, let's have that conversation right now, because that's the foundation of moving forward and how we move to change things on a global level. When people stop using words like committed, attaching it to suicide, well, then maybe people won't have the perception that it's illegal or immoral or somehow inconceivable that someone takes that action. Like, there's a reason for it. There's, like, the person is ill. The person is depressed. The person is not in their right mind, not capable of making good judgments. So of course they're going to get to a point where they're like, I just need this pain to end. And the only thing I have in my control is ending it, because nothing else works. Clearly they're at the end of their line. And when we stop using that word, because it's negative, look it up, any way you define the word commit, in the context of mental illness, it's going to be negative, like it's a sin or it's an illegal act. And now we're attaching it to this word that now anybody you use it with, all of a sudden that person is stigmatized. That poor person who is not in control is stigmatized.
And it's such a bad place to be in, right? Like being a suicide attempt survivor, I'll admit, like it took me a long time to even be able to admit that I was a suicide attempt survivor, or even use the word suicide in front of that. In the past, I would just say, I tried to take my life. But we need to get the word out there and be okay saying it and talking about it, because you really don't know what was going on in that person's head when they took their life. There's so many things that are playing in our heads at that time. Like you can't get it to stop. And now I'm going to get emotional. I'm trying not to.
Okay. This is a safe space.
It is a safe space. Like I said, I'm thankful I had 988. A month before it happened is when I found out about that number. Nobody knows. Like, if you talk to 10 people, I bet you 8 people don't know the number 988.
I bet you're right.
And, as we said in our previous episode, or a couple episodes ago, like, you don't have to be in a suicidal state to call that number. Anybody can call that number.
Mm-hmm.
Even to get to that point, to call that number, like that took a lot out of me, because the thoughts were playing in the back of my head. Well, if I commit suicide, how's my wife going to explain this? How is my family going to explain this? How are my friends going to explain this? Because there's so much stigma behind the word suicide. And we need to change the perception of that word, because people need to understand that for me, it was a mental illness. I was deeply depressed, right? People do things in their life that they're ashamed of that could lead to suicide. People are at a loss, right? Maybe they lost their closest friend or family member and they don't know how to go on. That can be a cause of suicide. Like, there's a lot that plays into that word, and be okay using it. Don't shy away from it, and you may think it's a cry for help, and it may be, but talk about it and use your words. You know how they tell you in school, use your words? Use your words, because those words are important.
They are, but at the same time, choose the words you use wisely. If we're trying to change the way people perceive someone with mental illness, then we have to be sensitive and intentional in the way that we talk about that. You don't want to label someone as their illness per se, right? But you want to identify that that's part of them, that that's driving their behaviors, that that's motivating their actions, things like that. But, I think that the more we change the vocabulary, the more we start to change the overall perception. Because, when you're in a state of mind that, like, for instance, you were in a couple of years ago, so many things playing in your head, right? And I'm just guessing, I wasn't in your head, but you and I have had so many conversations about this. Like I know you're laughing because thank God I wasn't in your head, but, but you're dealing with so many different things. Like, you're dealing with the issues that are challenging you in that moment. You're dealing with those feelings, whatever those feelings are of, some people like hopelessness or, anxiety or depression or worthlessness or all the different things. And then you're also dealing with the fact, like, okay, I'm feeling all these ways. And the only way to get help is to admit that I'm feeling this way. But, oh shit, when I admit that I'm feeling this way, now I'm going to be labeled. Now all of a sudden I'm going to have this automatic stigma that's layered over me. And when anybody talks to me, this is what they're going to lead with, or this is what they're going to think in their mind. And that must be a hard thing to reconcile with. Like you said it yourself, you said you thought consciously, like, oh my God, what will my family think and do? And what will my friends think and do? And look, I think you might even be in a minority in that case, because I don't think a lot of people are thinking beyond just the initial stress and strain and anxiety that they're feeling. They're not even thinking about how their actions are going to really reflect out to the rest of the world. They're just thinking about making it all stop. But, in your case, you did have that pause and you were thinking about it. And it must be really hard to cross over to that place of like, okay, something is happening that is not good, and it's not going to end well unless I take control.
100%. Like, I didn't understand what was going on. All I knew is I was so depressed, so depressed, and hadn't cried in months, and hadn't let it all out. I let it all sit inside me. And like I said, it was a glimmer. I don't quite understand it. I don't understand the little voice that was behind that, but it was, things could get better. And that's all I heard was things could get better. And that's why I made the call. When people think of me, they think of me as, successful and friend and family member and wife and suicide attempt survivor. And you know what? I'm okay with that because I had to battle it myself. And like I also said, it took me a couple of months to wrap my head around that also. But I'm a much better person because of it. I'm going to say, like, over the last couple of years, I've seen more and more talk of suicide, both positive and negatively, but more positive, like on places like LinkedIn and Instagram and even TikTok. Like, even though TikTok's not my genre, believe me, I've tried for years, but people are talking about it, and it's okay to use the word. Like, don't steer clear of it
No.
because it's something that we've all, like those of us that are attempt survivors, we've been there. We know what was going on in our heads. We need to use the word. Use your word.
I feel like just had this image of, the trust falls you used to do in gym class.
Mm-hmm.
I just had this incredible image of a trust fall. And I feel like in a lot of ways, that's what this is. That's what the whole concept of coming out of your shell or being vulnerable is all about. It's like a giant trust fall into the arms of the community that you find yourself in as a survivor, as an attempt survivor. And there's this kind of blind faith in a way that we all, I think, have to submit to at some point, because there's like that gray space between struggling with the thing, seeing support out there, knowing that people are out there, but how do I bridge the gap? How do I get past the stigma, right? How do I get past that? And I think the antidote to that is trust.
Take a step to your mental well-being with Calmery, trusted online therapy platform that supports you through life's challenges. Connect with licensed therapists and reap the benefits of traditional therapy enhanced with digital tools whenever you need it. Visit Calmery.com to get started.
100%. And, I think that, people, workplaces need to embrace this also, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's so much stigma around the word. And if you go to your workplace and say, hey, I tried to, commit, I tried to take my life. I wanted to commit suicide. And people shy away from that because the workplaces aren't equipped to handle that, right? And so they automatically place some stigma on that. Could also place some limitations on how far you go within the company and things like that. We're always being judged for the word suicide, when in reality, we are still productive members of society. We are still spouses. We are still friends. We are still coworkers. We give back to the community. We do all these things, but we get stigmatized because of the word suicide.
Yeah.
And we need to stop that because it makes it even worse for those of us that are trying to heal.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like a barrier within a barrier. And the thing that kills me, the thing that really irritates me when I really think about it is, so suicide is a result of a mental illness. Mental illness is an illness, right? You look at something like cancer, you look at something like heart disease, you look at something like an accident of some kind that takes somebody's life. There's no stigma. There's no stigma. Those people are sick. Those people had to get treatment in some cases. Those people maybe couldn't survive it in lots of cases. No one's out there stigmatizing those people. Their illness was beyond their control. Their illness maybe was resistant to treatment. They couldn't get help. They maybe passed away. Nobody's out there putting labels on them. It's like, oh, that poor person's family, and, all the support and, all the empathy in the world. There's no stigma. Then you flip over to our population of people, the survivors of the attempts and the survivors of the loss, and all of a sudden it's like we're swimming in stigma. That's all there is stigma. And it prevents us from grieving appropriately, and it prevents us from healing quickly or quicker. And it's so unfortunate. It's so unfortunate because it's so unnecessary. Like if people just understood that it was beyond anyone's control. Look, I think this is maybe a perfect opportunity for me to share what my own belief system around suicide used to be. Like you and I have talked about this. When I was a little girl, my first experience losing anyone at all was a cousin, and he died by suicide. So I was 9 years old. First time I experienced death. First time I knew anything about suicide. My parents never told me anything that would alter my belief system, like try to persuade me in one way or another that suicide was a bad thing. They were just very matter of fact about it. Your cousin's brain was broken in a way that we can't see, and he was very depressed and all those things. So nobody fed me anything. It was just like the truth, and I kind of ran with that. I developed that belief system that it was selfish. And I think there's where the stigma part comes in. I was one of those people who 100% believed there was a stigma attached to it all my life, quietly in my own heart. Wasn't anything I ever talked about. And it was only after I learned about my father's suicide and learned that he was mentally ill and learned that there were people in the world who could be that low and that desperate and that hopeless, and you never even saw it. You didn't even have a clue. And all of a sudden, it was like a lightning bolt to my head when that belief system just completely evaporated. And I was like, oh my God, how wrong have I been all these years? Like, that's beyond someone's control. That's the epiphany that I hope that you and I together can give to anybody who's listening to this podcast.
And, I had the same belief system until it happened to me. And I'm ashamed of myself, right? I'm ashamed that for all those years, for 59 years, that I believed that people were being selfish and that it was there were other ways out. But you go and you get into my shoes, and at that point, that's exactly how I felt. I didn't feel like I had any place else I could go, and I just wanted the pain to stop and the depression to stop and all these weird feelings in my head to stop. And now I'm a huge advocate for suicide awareness, and stopping the stigma and talking more openly about it and getting people to think. And I don't know, people just be a little kinder, okay? Because you really honestly have zero idea what's going on in somebody else's head unless you're in there with them. You go to the cashier at the grocery store and they're kind of rude. Okay, well, maybe there's some shit going on that you don't know about. Just be nice, right? And if you find out from a friend or a loved one or a coworker or somebody either, committed suicide or they attempted, fucking be nice, okay? Because there's just a lot going on at that time. And it's okay to use the word suicide. It really is. And the more we talk about it, the more it becomes the more we talk about it, the less the stigma goes away.
Yeah. It's hard because you want to change it overnight. You want people to just kind of snap into the reality of what this really is. And it doesn't work that way. And it takes time and it takes intentionality. But, it's just it's so important to kind of walk around in the world with empathy, not just for suicide survivors or people who have lost someone to suicide. It's in general, like in life, we need to be way more cognizant, I think, of the fact that we know such a tiny little sliver of what really happens in someone else's life. Like we have all these windows into other people's worlds, right? We've got all the social media platforms and we've got, everything is captured on video and everyone has the ability to kind of curate their own image in the world if they want to. And the world sees like 1% of what someone's life is really like and has absolutely no idea what's beneath the surface. And so I think just we should all be walking around the world with just a more compassionate heart. Like you're saying, like just be kind to people, just respect the fact that something's going on that you may not know about that is affecting their mood or their behavior. And in terms of like using words like suicide, like if I can speak for myself, only myself here, when I say that as a survivor of suicide loss, I am benefited greatly when people talk about my dad, when people ask me about my dad, when people ask me about my experience. There's something about it when it happens for me. Not only does it eliminate any kind of stigma, but it also kind of elevates my dad back into the into the picture. It makes me feel his presence more deeply, more acutely. And if you're ever out there worried about talking to someone who's an attempt survivor, talking to someone who's lost someone to suicide, it's incredibly valuable, I've found myself and to anybody who I've ever talked to, when you talk about it. The worst thing in the world that you'll encounter is that somebody might say, hey, I'm just really not up for that conversation right now, or I'd rather not say. Like, you're never going to offend someone because you want to talk about it with them. If anything, you're giving that person a signal that you're a safe space and that you can be trusted and that you really care. And I think the more of us who do that, that's how we create this community where talking about this stuff openly is just acceptable.
And for me, like, if anybody ever really wants to know my story, like the full story, reach out. I can tell you what was going through my head. I still remember the day as if it was today. What was going on in my head, what I felt, what I was doing. Like, I replay this day back in my mind 1,000 times a week. But I don't have a problem talking about it. You know what? I'm alive today because I made that call, but it took a lot of courage on my part to even pick up the phone. Yes, I'm a suicide attempt survivor, but you know what? I worked really, really hard over the last 2 years and put a lot of work into myself, and I feel better now than I felt in 20 years, and I want people to see me as a story of hope. But I still don't mind talking about suicide because it's part of my story.
Well, that's the thing. That's one facet of you. That's one part of your lived experience. That's one page in your bigger story. And it's the same with any of us. Like, whether you're a survivor and you can connect with what we talk about or not, on whatever level, you can connect with loss, you can connect with stress, you can connect with anxiety. Like, we're talking about suicide for sure. This is the Survivors Podcast, so this is one of the main themes, but it's not the only theme. Like, we're talking about surviving things like grief, surviving things like loss, not even just suicide related grief or loss. We're talking about just being a human and surviving life, because it's hard. Life is really, really hard and totally unpredictable. And just when we think we kind of like got our footing, the floor just collapses underneath us. It's we are a work in progress. We are always surviving. And I feel like when we have the ability to talk about this stuff openly, without fear of judgment, without worrying that someone's going to hesitate around us again, we realize that it's only one part of the much, much larger picture of who we all are as humans. That's when everything changes. That's when the playing field gets leveled. And that's when I think you're going to see people come out of the woodwork. I think as time passes, as platforms like ours and voices like ours start to permeate our culture, and people start to hear us talking, which gives them permission to start talking, and all of these voices become heard, that's when I think you're going to see people really saying, okay, here I am. I'm not okay either. I'm not okay either. And it's just, I think, going to be a beautiful kind of domino effect where people feel like they don't have to hide behind the mask anymore, especially those extroverted people that you and I talk about so often. People won't have to fake it anymore. People can just be who they are and get the help that they need, so they don't end up feeling hopeless.
And, the other thing too is like suicide attempt survivors and suicide loss survivors. Okay, that's just part of our story.
Mhm.
But, it makes, I'm so much more than that. I'm successful in my career. I'm a good friend. I'm a good colleague. I'm a great wife. I get back to the community. I do all the things, right? So it's just part of my story, but I'm not afraid to say that, yes, I'm a suicide loss survivor. I'm here today, and I want us to gather as a community and be able to talk freely about this and use the word suicide. There's no stigma behind that. It's part of my journey.
Yeah. It's part of your journey. It's part of so many other millions of other people's journey. And, we're all part of the same human experience. And the irony is to all of this is that we all go through the same things. Don't care where you live, what your religion is, or your language is, or your country of origin is. Like, we all grieve, we all hurt, we all love, we all experience joy and pain, and we are all surviving. Every single day we are surviving. And now we get to do it together, you and I, and hopefully we can chip away at this big ugly stigma so that eventually it'll just be that much easier for everyone to survive.
Amen. And this was such a great conversation, and I can't wait to talk to you again next week.
I know, I can't either. It's kind of making me wish it was next week already.
I
But we'll
know.
get there.
We'll get there. Thanks for joining us on The Survivors. Remember, no matter how tough things feel, you are enough, and the world needs you just the way you are. You're not alone in this journey. There's a community here, and every step forward counts. We're so grateful you took the time to listen, and we hope you'll take one day at a time. Just know there's always more light ahead.
Thanks for being here, friends. Just remember, help is out there in so many different places. So if you or someone you know is struggling, please call 988 and a trained crisis counselor like me will be there to help. You can also find an inclusive and comprehensive directory of mental health resources, tools, and content at thehelphub.co. Just remember that help is always just a call or a click away. We'll catch you next week. In the meantime, keep surviving.